I feel that the generation that is growing today, you and me don't have any idea what kind of intelligence they will tap into to survive in a world, in a job market. So the kids today has a much bigger job in understanding and surviving the changes that's coming to us in a much faster way than we can even imagine. And the rules of parenting has to adopt that. It has to embrace that these kids need to be more than a machine that we were in an economic cycle. You go 15, 16, 20, 28 years in school and you earn X amount and you are successful.
You know, what's the one thing that you think that as a parent you really screwed up and you wish you had a time machine, you could do that differently?
It's when I see things that I had to improve. It came from situations that were not very pleasant. Both my kids are very proud of me as a successful woman and a mom. And my daughter said that one thing she learned from that is that there is no limitation in growing. She said, "Mom, you taught me that there is no limitation if you want to grow. It's you who are having a hard time accepting the situation. It's you who has a hard time accepting the next other person. It's you who needs to think about that, their perspective, not your." So you kind of start reflecting and realizing that people not ever going to behave the way you want them to behave. People are not always going to see the way you see things. So you go through enough pain to recognize repeating incidents and events or situations to say, not worth it.
Yeah.
Not worth getting angry over this.
Yeah. So what do you do when you walk away? How do you calm yourself down?
I internalize what's happening. Either I do it by just going away from the situation. Either I put music on and I back in the garden, or I go for a walk, or I start doing something, or I start cooking, just something that distracts me physically. So physically I'm away. Mental is going, that doesn't stop. It just kept going. But physically I remove myself from the environment. I also try to write things when I'm not be able to process myself, because I so strongly believe that I was right. And it's somebody's problem. So there is a certain level of acceptance issue that happens. So when you write, it's just a expression of that moment. When you come back to and read that, like even a day later, you laugh. And that has worked for me. That writing is very good way for me to kind of slow my brain. And when I read that I skip the whole sentence writing way. Like when you read it, it's like, oh, my brain was going so fast. I couldn't even catch my hand couldn't even catch it. So it just tells you that it allows your brain to slow down. And then as you allow time, you also get to see the same situation differently.
Hey guys, thank you so much for following this channel and making our podcast into the top 3% global podcast ranking. When I started a year ago, I didn't think anyone would listen to this podcast, but it was you who made this a success. Now, before you watch the full video, please do me a small favor. Please hit the subscribe button to help me understand a bit more about your experiences and how we can improve our content. In every video, I have a deep conversation with someone whom I've recently met. We talked about different topics, including mental health, mindset, entrepreneurship, career, and most importantly, their stories on how they transform themselves from the younger self. I hope these conversations are useful to you and can bring you new perspectives. Please enjoy.
Hi, good day, everyone, and welcome back to the new episode on the Transformative Purpose podcast. I'm very excited to be hosting this chat. Joining me today is a MedTech expert, Golddy Kaur. Golddy has more than 3 decades of MedTech experience and held many positions, including executive leadership roles. She has experiences across general business management, strategy development, commercial functions, operations, engineering, quality, regulatory, and clinical research. And she is bringing a lot of innovations globally through research to commercialization stages, developing talent, and building winning teams. She focuses on achieving personal greatness and finding greatness in others to achieve business goals. What a pleasure to have you here, Golddy. How are you this evening?
Thank you. Great. Pleasure to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this chat. Is rare to speak to someone with such a diverse background, and you're a bit of a scientist yourself.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about you, Golddy.
It's good to give some background. I'm born and brought up in India. My dad migrated to Canada in late 80s, and he brought us with him. So we migrated here after my university, and then started my professional career here. So kept with education and working same time. It's a new immigrant story, and growing through the corporate ladders. And from India, I also want to mention that, you come from a very different culture than where I'm working or where I worked. And the cultural part plays a big role in who we are and how we grow. Has its pros and cons. So we will be talking more about that, how our minds are conditioned in certain way and how we deal with the situation in certain ways.
Yeah. So when we had a chat about a week ago, we were brainstorming what topic we should talk about, right? And you mentioned about parenting. Just out of curiosity, given your background in the medical space, why do you think this parenting topic is important? What does it mean to you?
As a working mother and very ambitious mindset, you have to do justice to everything that you are doing, and parenting is one major part of it. And I thought that it would be good to hear from working mom, what does it mean to be ambitious in your career, also grow a young family. You
have 2 children, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, I have a daughter and son. They are both completed their education. They are both undergrad and full-time working. So I'm a proud mother from that perspective.
It's not an easy job. I'm a father of 2 young children. They're 4 and 1.5. I'm pretty much on that journey. So I'm sure you've learned a lot from your parenting journey. You mentioned birth to your 2 children. Have you had a break in between, or have you always? Right. Okay.
No. So luckily in Canada, you do get parental leave. So for my first child, it was 6 months. You spend time with your child. And by the time I had my second child, it was 1 year of time off. Other than that, it was full-time work and full-time parent, whatever you call it. But yeah, both were the priority in the life. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get real here. What's your biggest lesson learned from, working, being a working parent for so many years and now having 2, I guess, grown up adults almost?
It's, good to reflect on things. I think when you are going through it, good or bad doesn't mean anything. You're doing your best. So as I reflect on it, I feel that as an intellectual person and based on the background, my dad was mechanical engineer, and he lived in very highly influential British culture. And, so that was very focused on how I saw life. So go make yourself, improve yourself, educate yourself, continuous learning, get higher status in life. Like that was my conditioning. So I did that, never questioned it. But having a child, I think now that I reflect on, and I also kind of volunteer a lot. So I see other kids and I see other, issues that happening in society. Reflecting on that, I feel intellectual success or progress is so minimal in life. If you don't have a balance of emotional and social aspects as you focus on your career and your growth, you miss out on a lot of things. And that's my learning. I feel that I was not as emotionally available as I could have. Either if I knew that's how important that part of development is. That's my kind of reflection on if I have to redo it, I probably will balance the intellect and the emotional development of a child and also the social development of a child. They grow on their own pace. But in a work lifestyle, you are chasing time. You have to do things on time, and kids are not bound by that. They have an emotional state where you kind of have to give them time to be ready for something. I think that's something that I feel I could have done better.
Wow, I can certainly see the humble side of you, and even for myself, I'm learning every single day, and I very much agree with you that back at school, no one has taught us how to be a parent, right? They've told us how not to get someone pregnant, but they very much missed the parenting part. And it sounds like you've learned a lot from your journey. You mentioned about this conditioning sort of in your upbringing, right? When did you come to realization that you had those conditions within you? Was there a trigger, something that happened in your family that made you realize that? At what point were you aware of that?
Yeah, so I have two kids and they both are very different. And one of my child is when I start hearing that you don't understand or you don't care, or it's like, constantly asking, are you proud of me? So you're realizing that what's the difference here? Why these questions? And it took a while before you realize that your perception in child's mind is their reality. And the conditions that we had is like, I did not see that growing. I did not have that vocabulary for my dad or for my mom. So I have no idea to say to my parent and kind of challenge them that why you don't understand me, right? I feel that the cultural conditioning is so strong, and especially if your child is growing in a different culture than you grew up in, you will not understand. If your child is expressing it, you're lucky. It may feel painful. It is like, what do you mean I don't care? I do this for you. What do you mean I don't care? I do care. Can you not see it? So it's so at that moment, it's a defense mechanism.
Yeah, it must have
that
hurt,
kicks
right?
in. Yeah, it's that as a social and animals that we are, we always look for validation. It's like someone tells you good about you, you're so happy. If someone tells you you're not so good, you suck, you kind of say, I stay away from me. I don't want to talk to you. That part, of course, it feels like what I am not doing right.
That feedback loop when your child said that to you, how old were they?
High school.
Right.
Yeah.
And how did you react? You mentioned that your defensive mechanism sort of kicked in, what were you feeling, and how did you respond?
It's like, again, that conditioning is that you are doing everything right for your child, and that conditioning is when that's questioned, you don't even know how to be. You don't know how to react to that. So what you do, what I did, it was just come up with more and more stricter rules.
Can you give us
You
an
put rules.
example?
It's like, if my conditions is that girls are more protected as a child, like, we were not allowed to be out at night. We were not allowed to be hanging out with guys at night. And for us, that was not even a question to say, why? My friend's doing it, why can't I do it? So that's condition my brain has, developed. Now you are in a different culture, different conditions where it's a norm. So instead of you accepting that norm, you've been challenged by that norm. And you question, and what it does, it creates more and more conflict. It's like your way or their way. So there is no in between. And that's where this emotional development kind of matters, because as you know, if you look at all the literature in neuroscience and how the frontal cortex is developed, it is the rationale in adult mind is not same in young adolescents, right? Or young adult. Their mind is not rationalizing thing the way you rationalize. Their mind is not same problem solving as an adult mind. So cultural conditioning is that child just have to obey you as a parent because you have the best interest in mind for them, and you should not be questioned about that. So it's certainly a reflection on as a parent, if your child is speaking up and resisting, a parent should take a real step back and think about why. It's rather than being that authoritative mindset to say, I'm thinking about you, I want good for you, I want this for you. It's no longer it's what you want. It's their development, it's their life intelligence. They come with certain personality. Looking at today and learn more about it, it's like you are gifted with the life, and your job is to learn that life, not to create a frame that you conditioned with and try to fit that life in that condition, because it's not the same. It's absolutely different.
So many insights that you just shared. You touched on conflict management. I wanted to ask your opinion and advice. How did you deal with conflicts before versus if you were to do it again? How would you deal with conflicts now? You mentioned that the norms have shifted, and I think in so many ways. I'm a Centennial. I grew up in the 80s. So my childhood was all about this analog environment. There was no digital devices. And then I was exposed to my teens. So I've seen the pros and cons of both the analog side and the digital side. And you mentioned that, norms have shifted in so many ways. The way that we approach work, the way that we are normalizing almost multitasking.
Yes.
But if you look at how our brains work, how our brains function, multitasking, for example, is not very effective, right? But there's so many ways that our society has shifted from where we were. How do you deal with conflicts, and when your norm is so different to today's norm, and it's either your way or the highway? It's no longer your way or the highway. Almost, you kind of. How do you deal with conflicts? How do you manage them?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Uh, um, it goes back to the conditioning of mind. Conflict comes where you have a fear of some unknown, because you have a one way of thinking, somebody has another way of thinking, and that raises a conflict. And you will say, because of your conditioning, you will say, I am doing it for you, I am right. And they will say, you don't understand, I am right. Two cannot be right. One of my mentor one time said that, Goldie, you want to be right or you want to be happy? And I answered him, I want to be right and happy. He said, doesn't work. Um, so the conflict is always that if you have these hands pushing each other, right? The more you push, the more force you kind of receive. If you remove one hand, there is no force to push, right? So the conflict for me, when I was going through it myself with teenage issues and cultural differences that I was seeing, for my mind, it was, oh my God, something wrong's gonna happen, or my child is more influenced by the culture that is not acceptable to me. My mechanism was more shutting down. I would shut down and not continue the conversation because I felt like I am not making any sense to the person I'm talking to. It's no longer a conversation. Mm-hmm. It's accusations. It's like you versus me, I'm this and you are that. I just don't engage in that. So I shut down. Shutting down had a value at that time, that it doesn't escalate the issue. But if I was not able to shut down, it generally escalates the issue and two people are angry. There is no solution. So I learned from that to not engage. And because I wanted to avoid that conflict, to a point where it becomes escalation. Now looking back, I feel that if you truly want best for your child, that's truly what your desire is, then you need to be a guide to them and not the master. And when you think that you know better, your child has to follow because you know better, that's the first mistake. The idea is that you don't know better. Every life has its own intelligence. And if that is not true, we would have not seen much growth in society. Society has grown because people think differently than their previous generation. I think that was a big miss on my part. It's like, you are going back to that intellectual thinking. Intellectual thinking is just that you are prepared to be successful within the economic engine. Outside of that engine, life exists, but mind was not conditioned for that. So for me, the AI is you touched on it, that analog versus digital. I was talking to someone, very smart guy, and he said that why people are afraid of AI. Think about this way, that it's a data, it's information fed into something, and there is an output. We are no different in intellectual definition. We go to school, to university, the data is fed. And based on our memory, we output some things, right? So is that all we are? Is that intellect? Or is that AI function that's happening in us? Like, my memory is better than yours, so I will output information. Or 50% of the class will output the same information than a robot will today, right? So what makes me different? What makes me a human different? I feel that the generation that is growing today, you and me don't have any idea what kind of intelligence they will tap into to survive in a world, in a job market. Right? We went to school to be a doctor, to be an engineer, to be a scientist, to be a lawyer, based on the data fed in our head. That's it, right? If the data is fed in a machine and machine does what we can do, what is your value as a human? So the kids today has a much bigger job in understanding and surviving the changes that's coming to us in a much faster way than we can even imagine. And the rules of parenting has to adopt that. It has to embrace that these kids need to be more than a machine that we were in an economic cycle. You go 15, 16, 20, 28 years in school, and you are an X amount, and you are successful.
How should,
right?
I think you touched on a very important topic, and also a very hot topic at the moment, right? And I really love the things that you just said, and I think they're very profound. That's one of the questions I keep asking myself too. If my kids were to ask me, what should I study, or what profession should I go into? I don't have the answer to that.
No.
And
no, they're all catching up to this, right? I mean, people are trying to figure it out.
Yeah. And what's the point of studying all this knowledge if machines already have all the answers just with a few clicks, right?
Yeah.
But I think you touched on a very important point, is that I think we as humans, we need to remember that we have the ability, the cognitive ability to internalize different sources of information and to look at different patterns and to come up with different insights. And I think that's something that's the machines can't do yet because they can't really replicate our brain. And I do feel that our brain, if we can untangle all these biases that we have accumulated throughout the years, our brain can take us anywhere we want. So, Golddy, I want to ask you, right? Let's just say your children. I know that you're going to share this podcast with your children later on.
Yes.
What's the one message you want to tell your children as a parent? What's the one thing that you think that as a parent you really screwed up and you wish you had a time machine, you could do that differently?
I won't say screwed up. My both kids are doing really well. They are wonderful human beings. It's when I see things that I had to improve, it came from situations that were not very pleasant. And both my kids are very proud of me as a successful woman and a mom. And my daughter said that one thing she learned from that is that there is no limitation in growing. She said, "Mom, you taught me that there is no limitation if you want to grow."
That's beautiful.
So that's one thing. My son was also, talking to me about this. We would talk about different things, and he was talking about the growth thing, and he also said that how I juggle so many different things and how I struggle emotionally, it was obvious to them. It was not that a hush that I don't say in front of my kid and I go say outside to somebody. The mistakes are because you recognizing something is different, something that how you see it is not seen by your child. And it's, I would say that instead of calling it a screw up, I think we as a family learn to celebrate differences. So we are all very different people. We are outspoken. We call each other out. I've been called out so many times, It's so wonderful. It hurts time to time. It's like someone tells you that you screwed up or you messed something, not pleasant to hear. But at the same time, there is a recognition that if someone is calling you out inside the house, be thankful.
Yeah.
Because showing you a mirror is the best way for you to reflect.
Oh yeah, I have the same analogy.
And I think my kids would not disagree with that. I think they both will. These things, nothing what I'm saying here is new to them because we communicate really well.
Yeah, I personally use this hack because you mentioned mirror. Because from time to time, sometimes I find myself like getting worked up whenever my children act out, right? So in order to bypass those shortcuts that our brain makes, I had to reinvent another shortcut to sort of hack those shortcuts. So I started associating my children with a mirror. So whenever they act out, I no longer see the behaviors. I just see a mirror of myself, just my own image, and it tells me, it gives me that extra mental space to process those heated moments, and before I do something that I might regret. Calling out the behaviors within your household. What does that look like? And how does someone instill that culture in the family?
Yeah, so I mentioned about me shutting down during the conflict. The one thing about that is that there is no escalation, raising voice, something breaking into fight. So none of that existed in my house. There is no loud discussion or arguments to a point where it shuts down. So it's mostly like when you are disagreeing with something, you allow that conversation to happen. It was not always like that. It kind of happened slowly, but you are reflecting on situation versus the feelings only. I don't know if I have any example of that, but it's like, so for example, I'm thinking of one here. It's, I am upset about something, and my child would say, "You look angry," right? And I would say, "No, I'm not angry," right? Now, it's pretty obvious that you are, so why don't you just say it, what you have to say, right? And it's like, I'm not ready for it. When I'm ready, I'll say it. So giving a cold shoulder for a while, it allows me also to kind of calm down a bit from my own anger. And then you start the conversation, right? So it's like non-verbal communication when you are showing attitude or you're giving cold shoulders or you're not talking or there is a communication happening and somebody called you out and you flat out said, "No, I'm not angry. No, I'm not this," right? So it's just the choices. It depends on individuals. I used to be very, it's like, this is the right thing to do. Just do it. Don't argue about it. Right. I was very much like that. And again, it goes back to the cultural conditioning. Is like, this is how it is done. This is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And some of those escalations were not pleasant. It was unpleasant escalations, not from a verbal or fight perspective, but just from an understanding perspective. It's like, how do I explain this so it makes sense to somebody? That's that kind of a frustration. So that's how we kind of called each other out, or sometime, I will tell my husband that, if I'm telling you something, I'm not expecting you to respond, right? So don't try to respond to it. Just hear me out. That's it. I'm feeling bad, and so it's nothing wrong with it. I'm feeling bad. So once you start telling me while I'm feeling bad, you're actually making me feel more bad. So just don't say anything. And if you start saying, I'll walk away, I will not talk to you. Right? So it's a different way of like, if I'm upset, I'm upset. If my verbal, physical moments are obvious, I would deny, just leave it. Let, okay, she's denying, she'll calm down and she'll come back to it. Very, very, very rarely I had like just lash out kind of a thing. It's just like, I just say it something. Very rarely. Mostly I would shut down. I would just not engage myself in a conversation.
Yeah. And like you said earlier in our conversation, right? I think we can try to be our best, but we can't get it right 100% of the time. So I think even if parents lash out, I mean, lashing out is probably not the behavior that we should encourage. But I believe that if you're good 99% of the time, you can give your permission to make mistakes for that remaining 1%, right?
Oh yeah,
and then,
yeah.
And then you internalize it. So sometimes I scream, I raise my voice, and I'll apologize to my children and say, Daddy's really sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I let my emotions get ahead of me. And I think it's important to show that vulnerability to your children. Like, you're not perfect. And I'm not telling my children I'm perfect. I'm always right here. I also make mistakes. I'm also learning. And by doing that, I also hope that we can teach the next generation about humility, that making mistakes is okay. As long as, like you said, we look at everything as an opportunity to learn. I used a negative word like screwed up in the beginning, and I love how you reframe it into something like a growth opportunity, right?
Yeah, I feel that when I mentioned about celebrate the differences, it's not just in home. It's also important at work, because we are all so different, and there is a common space that we operate in, and that common space is always about the situation, right? So for us to be kind of like having this environment where you feel safe, you feel no fear of expressing yourself, and if you don't have that common space where you can be yourself, then it's kind of hard to deal with yourself or deal with the situation. So facilitating the differences, facilitating the people to express themselves, either they shut down and they come back to it, or they just say the way they want to say it, but not reacting to it, and then kind of taking a pause.
Yeah.
And allowing it to settle a bit before you start solving it.
Yeah.
I find that has worked.
What's your strategy, or what's your tactic to transition yourself from that anger state to a more calm state? So you mentioned that when you face negative stimuli, sometimes you realize that you're not at that state where you can engage in a constructive conversation, right? So what do you do when you walk away? How do you calm yourself down?
I find that I internalize what's happening. Either I do it by just going for, like, away from the situation. Either I put music on and I back in the garden, or I go for a walk, or I start doing something, or I start cooking, just something that distracts me physically. So physically I'm away. Mental is going, that doesn't stop. It just kept going. But physically I remove myself from the environment. And then I also try to write things when I'm not be able to process myself, because I so strongly believe that I was right, and it's somebody's problem. So there is a certain level of acceptance issue that happens. So when you write, it's just a expression of that moment. When you come back to and read that, like even a day later, you laugh. And that has worked for me, that writing is very good way for me to kind of slow my brain. And when I read that I skip the whole sentence writing way. Like when you read it, it's like, oh, my brain was going so fast, I couldn't even catch my hand couldn't even catch it. So it just tells you that it allows your brain to slow down. And then as you allow time, you also get to see the same situation differently. And you feel like that, it's you who are having a hard time accepting the situation. It's you who has a hard time accepting the next other person. It's you who needs to think about that, their perspective, not your. So you kind of start reflecting and realizing that people not ever going to behave the way you want them to behave. People are not always going to see the way you see things. So you go through enough pain to recognize repeating incidents and events or situations to say, not worth it.
Yeah.
Not worth getting angry over this.
Yeah. And it's easier said than done, right? I mean, as parents,
You have to go through it. Yes.
You want our children to be happy and healthy, but sometimes we gotta let go for the better of our relationships, like you said.
Yeah. I don't think for me it is a let go. I think it is, there is a neuroscientist, Marsha Linehan, and she wrote a lot about personalities. And the word she used is radical acceptance. So I had a friend who is a scientist, a neuroscientist, and I was asking this, like, what does this radical acceptance means, right? It's like either you accept, you don't accept. What is this radical acceptance means? And she helped me understand that people and personalities don't change overnight. And if I have a conditioning, they have a conditioning. The way they behave, they have many underlying issues, the way they behave. If somebody is coming to you inappropriately or things that are not acceptable to you, they may be coming from a hurt place, somewhere down, their past. Something happened that hurts them and they kind of just give you hurt. That's what they have. So they give you that. Doesn't mean you are right or they are right. So she actually really helped me understand that part. And I think with kids, it's not about what we have to let go. I think it's about really radically accepting who they are as a life, not as a behavior, because their behavior develop and they change. And we were talking about discipline, and for me, definition of discipline was there is a schedule, you do these things and you do it regularly. That's a discipline, right? And conflict comes when you want the discipline or schedule your child to follow, they don't follow. And then you say, oh my God, my kids are not disciplined. They don't learn, right? So the definition of discipline is like if your child is really interested in something and they are doing it with a joy, they will keep doing it until they get better at it. It's like my let's say my child plays basketball, and I don't have to tell the child to be disciplined on go practicing basketball. Because they enjoy it, they keep doing it on time. They just go and do play, and that they're disciplined. And so the definition is that if you really have a passion and if you really enjoy something, you will do it. You don't need anybody to tell you to do it. So as a parent, instead of creating a structure for them to fit in, you watch what actually help them to have the self-discipline to say, I really like it, I want to do it. If I'm making a drawing, I didn't like it, I want to do it again to make it perfect. They have a discipline about that chore that they want to do. with the digital era, I think the definition of discipline has totally changed. It has totally changed. So parents start handing out these devices to which allow them to get something else done. So child don't bother them. Now child has developed that discipline over a period of time because they enjoy it, they like it, they have they feel very passionate about, I want to win this level of game. When mother wakes up, it's too late because now they have developed it to a point where they don't want to give up, right? So it's just, we need to really look at from their perspective and really look at from, is this child my reflection of what they need to be, or is this child a independent life that needs to grow with you being around, you have a guidance for them. If you are not providing a guidance, somebody else online will, and they will just follow that. And you need to be that guide for them versus creating your structure and try to fit them in that structure.
Yeah, a great advice, Golddy. So in all of my episodes, I asked the previous speaker to ask a question to the next speaker. So last time I spoke to a woman called Veronica Smith, and she's in a bit of a transition herself, being unemployed for about 6 months and stuck in a foreign country with 2 kids, and couldn't find a job because even though she used to work for Apple and all these big companies, she didn't have the relevant network in Australia, and it was also in the middle of COVID. So last episode, we talked a lot about how she reinvented herself with personal branding and content creation. And I asked her what she wants to ask you. And the question she wants to ask you is, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I never thought like that. It may sound negative, but I don't plan long term. I focus on what I am doing now is I'm doing at my best. And I'm so intense in what I do, whatever I do. I do it with certain intensity. And future keeps unrolling for me. It has been that way. I did not ever plan to be a senior vice president. I actually kept delivering on things that were given to me and excelling to a point where people who worked with me start trusting me, relying on me, and that's kept my growth going. So my answer is that we don't know tomorrow, we don't know future. What we know is today, and what we know is to keep our energy so high for today that you have a level of intensity no matter what you do. And once you have that intensity of work and you are really good at what you do, people in your surrounding cannot ignore it. They will start recognizing it.
Yeah, I love it. So what about you? So I'm going to be doing another podcast in 2 hours time, actually. And like I said before the start of this conversation, I'll be speaking to a young lady who's in public speaking and in debate. What question do you want to ask her?
We started with intellectual and emotional intelligence. I would love to know for the younger generation what can be done to bring emotional intelligence from the get-go. School system, home system, society, community, whatever needs to change. What would that change be that we grow human with a certain level of emotional intelligence?
Beautiful. I'm sure she will love this question. I'm going to ask her later when I see her. Hey, thank you so much, Golddy. Thank you so much for all the insights and sharing all your humble lessons, raising 2, very successful children of your own. And I love hearing all the insights from you, whether it was neuroscience or really pragmatic advices, just about being that parent. And the point that you mentioned about these 3 onion layers almost, when we as parents, when we try to raise our children, we should think about the intellect, the emotional component, and the social component. So really enjoy this conversation. Thank you so much for taking your time to
Thank
come
you,
on
Aaron,
here.
for having me. And I hope that someone will find this useful and they can, make some changes in growing their kids, because kids are our future. I mean, we are developing next generation. People who are having kids, I think they need to recognize that they are investing their life into developing next generation. And we need to really come up with new ideas. So thanks for this podcast and hosting me. It was wonderful.
No worries. Good to have you here. Have a good day.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.